I want to try and beat Stardew Valley without using a single tool. The idea on its own has been done many times before, but nobody has ever attempted the ultimate goal, perfection. And there's good reason for that. So much of Stardew Valley is built around using tools, that removing them doesn't just make the game harder, it made previously simple things completely impossible. The rules for this challenge are simple. I will not be allowed to use any tools, which meant no axe for chopping trees, or no pickaxe to mine rocks. And will also include any fishing rods or farming tools. Without tools, I would have to be extremely careful with every single decision I made, what I spent my gold on, and which parts of the game I could even get to. This challenge sounds ridiculous, but I believe it will force me to play the game in ways I'd never had before, and I'd have to use strange and obscure strategies to beat it. I cannot wait to begin. So, can you achieve perfection in Stardew Valley without using tools? Let's find out together. After much thought, I decided for this run to start on the Meadowlands farm. Not because it was particularly optimal, or even that good. It was because the one thing I did know is I couldn't plant crops, so I wouldn't even be able to plant the 15 parsnips you normally start with. And the 2 chickens were really the only advantage I could give myself. Without a hoe, nothing could be planted, and even if somehow I found a way to plant crops, without a watering can, they could never grow unless I waited on rain. The entire early game just didn't exist to me. I could keep the chickens alive and produce some eggs for me using the hay you get free, but beyond that, I had no way to actually do anything at all. So I did the only thing I could. I wandered around town, picking up forage and checking every single trash can I passed. I ended the day with a handful of spring forage, a lot of trash, and the obvious realization that this wasn't just going to be slow, it was going to be restrictive in a way Stardew Valley isn't really designed for, and is usually the point in these kind of challenges where things start to go wrong, if they haven't already. The next morning, the game tried to fix my mistake. I got the message saying that my missing tools had been moved to the town's Lost and Found. A safety feature meant to stop players from accidentally losing their tools and soft-locking themselves. That didn't really matter. Every tool I wasn't allowed to use was now sitting in a chest inside Mayor Lewis's house, safe, untouched, and also completely useless. Later that day, Willie invited me down to the beach and handed me the bamboo pole, but since it's also classified as a tool, it immediately joined the rest of them in the Lost and Found. So once again, there was nothing to do but wander around. More foraging, more checking trash cans, and one piece of coal I couldn't really use for anything. That's when 2 problems became obvious to me. First, progress was basically non-existent in this challenge, and second, without an axe, I couldn't even make myself a basic chest, which caused my inventory to fill up pretty much immediately. For now, the only solution was dumping items onto the ground and hoping nothing went wrong. Overnight, I hit level 1 foraging, unlocking wild seeds and field snacks. And weirdly enough, those wild seeds were the first thing that actually felt a bit promising. Even without tools, I could gather everything I needed to craft some of them. They sell for a decent amount of money, and later on, they were going to become much more important. For the next few days, nothing really changed. I ran the same loop over and over, collecting forage, checking trash cans, and hoping something would change. Then, on day 5, a few things finally happened. Marnie asked me to adopt a cat, which I obviously accepted, and shortly after that, Mayor Lewis dragged me into town to show me the abandoned community centre. I'd keep it at the back of my mind for now. I'd need to repair it eventually for perfection, but for now, that was a problem for future Tom to solve. What actually mattered today was that the mines had opened up. When I entered, Marlon handed me the rusty sword, and for the first time, I had something I was actually allowed to use. The sword is not classed as a tool. Without a pickaxe, I couldn't break any of the rocks, and I couldn't even get past floor 1. No enemies would spawn here either, which meant the mines were still basically inaccessible for now. And also considering I'd eventually need to get to floor 120 for the skull key, that felt very far away. The sword still did change everything. I could finally clear grass and collect fibre. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was the first time this run had felt like hope was on the horizon. And oh boy would I be right. And that hope was the travelling cart. If you didn't know, the travelling cart arrives every Friday and Sunday and can sell an insane pool of items, one of them being the quality sprinkler. This meant if I could somehow find a way to till the dirt, I could water 8 crops at a time. I did get a little bit excited, and I chose to buy some seeds ready for when I figured that problem out. It wasn't much, but at least now we have a plan. After that, progress would slow to a crawl again, until I finally hit level 1 farming just from collecting eggs. Then the travelling cart came back, And for the first time, it sold something that actually changed everything. A single bomb for 900 gold. That one item, wouldn't you know it, unlocked the entire rest of this challenge. Bombs till the ground automatically, which meant I could finally place the sprinkler and grow some crops. But they could also be used to break rocks, which meant they could be used in the mines. And since I had no way to make any more, I had to choose. In the end, I chose to use it on the farm. Using it in the mines I felt would have been a waste. One floor deeper wouldn't really change anything for us, but crops definitely will. So I blew up a small section of land, planted 8 potatoes, and for the first time in the entire run, farming actually existed in a farming game. Something I didn't even feel was possible. The next morning, seeing them all watered perfectly just felt ridiculous. No watering can, no tools, and somehow this was possible. Remember how the community centre was going to matter later? Well, this is where it finally did. With it unlocked, I could donate the spring forage I'd been hoarding and get 30 wild seeds in return. More importantly, it unlocked the pantry and the fish tank, which opened a very specific path forward. The fish tank was the big one. Completing the crab pot bundle would give me access to crab pots, which suddenly made a lot of otherwise impossible things feel very possible, such as fishing experience without a fishing rod. By this point, I'd searched so many trash cans that I managed to come across the trash hat. At that point, it felt appropriate just to keep it on for the rest of the run. Not long after that, I returned Robin's lost axe, and for the first time actually checked out her shop. That's when I realised something that completely changed my mind on how to progress in this challenge. You can actually buy wood and stone directly from Robin. It's expensive, but that would mean I'm not locked out of chests, furnaces, buildings and everything. When the egg festival came around, I seriously considered buying some strawberry seeds, but I decided against it. I felt that keeping the gold was more valuable than crops at the moment, especially with the travelling cart potentially giving me better items. I still did the egg hunt, however. Winning doesn't give you anything, just a hat and a guaranteed prize ticket next year. But at this point, every small advantage mattered. Eventually, the potatoes finally finished growing. It sounds small, but seeing actual crops on the farm felt huge. I harvested 10 in total and replanted 8 of them, and for the first time, the path forward was clear. Around the same time, salmon berry season had started. Bushes all over the valley were suddenly covered in berries, which made for easy foraging experience and also a reliable way to make some extra gold. With more items coming in, my storage problem finally became impossible to ignore. I gave in and bought 50 wood from Robin just to build myself a chest, and the relief I felt being able to store things properly was just incredible. Of course, that small sense of happiness didn't really last very long. Using the bench in the cabin, I managed to access the secret woods. It actually worked better than I expected. I found some new forageables, and for the first time in the run, I could even fight slimes. But when I tried to leave, the bench wouldn't let me. I was completely stuck, and I was forced to pass out, losing a chunk of gold. It wasn't the end of the world, but it definitely was a reminder to me that a challenge like this was always going to come with consequences. Overnight, things shifted once again. I managed to hit farming level 2 and unlocked the mayonnaise machine and also the sprinkler. Both would be super good to get, although they were both locked behind materials I could only get from the mines. Although that wasn't entirely true. I did remember that I could actually buy ore directly from Clint. I bought a bunch of copper and iron ore, which forced him to show up the next morning and hand over the furnace recipe. After buying the remainder of the stone I needed from Robin, I could finally make myself one. And with that in place, I smelted my first copper bar and iron bar. These two combined was all I needed to make myself a sprinkler. Although I did use the only bomb I had, so there was no way to place it until I could find a way to till more ground. But at least it meant that whenever I solved that problem, farming could scale up immediately. A few days later, the travelling cart showed up again. This time it sold a mega bomb for just 200 gold. Compared to the regular bomb, this one was a lot more dangerous to waste. It could till a huge area on the farm. Although, using it just to place one single sprinkler just didn't feel right with me. So instead of rushing into anything, I decided to hold on to it. After another potato harvest, I bought the last seeds I could before the season ended. There was only time for one more harvest, so this was as far as spring farming was going to go. All of this time though, there were 2 other things happening quietly in the background, both tied to friendship. The first one was Caroline. I was working towards 2 hearts with her so I could access the tea room and unlock the tea sapling recipe. Tea saplings are absurdly valuable for just how cheap they are to make, and more importantly for me, every ingredient was something I already had access to. So I bought a batch of wood from Robin, crafted as many tea saplings as I could, and overnight woke up with just over 3,000 gold. And on the 25th was the start of a new beginning. The bookseller was in town, and for 5,000 gold, he would sell me a mining monthly book. This, once read, would grant me 250 mining experience. And how much experience do you need for level 1 mining? 100. And what do you unlock at level 1 mining? The crafting recipe for the cherry bombs. They require both copper and coal to make, which we can buy as much as we can from Clint. This opened up so many things for me. We now had a better way to till the ground, and we can also begin making progress inside the mines. This is typically the point I would get overconfident, and I was very aware of that. With access to bombs, I didn't hesitate. I crafted a handful of cherry bombs and headed straight to the mines. I still had to be careful though. I only had a few, and if I ran out before finding enough copper to replace them, this whole plan would collapse immediately. I didn't make it very far down first. I ran out of bombs around floor 7, but that was enough, because now the elevator was unlocked. I could now freely travel to floor 5, which meant I could actually now farm copper, fight slimes, and could now finally interact with the mines in a way that would actually give us progress. With access to earth crystals, I could build myself a mayonnaise machine and start turning the eggs into something that's worth selling. By the end of spring, I'd pushed down all the way to floor 15, picked up a new pair of boots, and found a wooden club. And on floor 13, something completely unexpected dropped, an ancient seed. If I could figure out a way to plant it safely, that single seed would eventually turn into the best crop in the entire game. On the very last day of the season, Willie stopped by and handed me the training rod, which was ironic and quite funny, because I hadn't been fishing at all. The rod itself was useless, as it's a tool, but the visit still gave me fishing level 1. In a run where leveling fishing was going to be one of the hardest things to do, that mattered more than it probably should do. By the end of spring, mayonnaise sales and tea saplings left me with just under 4,000 gold. It wasn't a fortune, but was just enough to keep me going. By the time spring ended, I wasn't surviving day to day anymore. I finally had a few systems working, a way to make money, and just enough to start thinking long term. Summer is where this plan could go into fruition. I still didn't have tools, the mines were barely accessible, and most of the game was still locked away to me, and we were just about to run into a huge problem. With the cherry bombs, I could till just enough land to plant 8 blueberry seeds, and that alone changed everything compared to last season. Blueberries regrow all season, which meant no more constantly buying seeds. I even decided to use some speed grow to push the returns even higher. There was still a catch though. Once those crops withered, I had no way to clear them. Without a scythe, I couldn't reuse the quality sprinkler I bought from the travelling cart, or at least, that's what I thought at the time. With some extra gold coming in, I bought 2 more chickens. It wasn't really exciting, but it meant a steady flow of mayonnaise and a bit of passive income throughout the season. On the 5th day, green rain hit the valley. Normally it's quite forgettable, but this time it mattered. Since my club could be used to clear fibre, that gave me an entire day's worth of one of the most important resources in this run. Later, while pushing it further into the mines, I found yet another ancient seed. As tempting as it was to plant it immediately, I decided to hold on to them both until I unlocked the greenhouse. At the travelling car, I picked up a snail in order to finish the crab pot bundle, which rewarded me with 3 crab pots, and that quietly solved one of the biggest problems in this entire challenge. Perfection obviously requires you max every single skill in the game, which does include fishing. Without a fishing rod, that sounds pretty impossible, and it did to me. That was when I found out that crab pots give fishing experience. It was only 5 every crab pot. It's not much, but it's enough to keep going. Although I still had another problem: bait. You can't buy it or craft it reliably until level 2 fishing, which put me in a loop I just couldn't break. But that's where the second friendship I'd been working on since the start finally mattered. Once you reach 4 hearts with Linus, he gives you the recipe for wild bait. It's cheap to make, and with access to slimes and bug meat from the mines, it was exactly what I needed to continue. While all of that was happening, I also wrapped up the summer foraging bundle and picked up some summer seeds from the reward. Now that I could finally start thinking long term, I started testing up some things for later. I crafted my first tapper and put it on an oak tree, knowing eventually I'll need a lot of oak resin for kegs. I pushed deeper into the mines as well, reaching floor 30 and upgrading my weapon to the insect head. By the middle of the summer, things were slowly compounding together. A visit from the crop fairy fully grew some blueberries, and between those and some tea saplings, I was sitting on around 14,000 gold. Not long after that, I reached floor 40 in the mines and hit the frozen levels, which finally gave me access to some iron ore. At this point, however, I finally came to the realization that restoring the community centre the normal way just wasn't realistic. The fish tank bundle alone would require years of travelling cart luck, since that would be the only way we can get the fish. So instead I committed to the Joja route. I don't like choosing the Joja route, as it is much easier, but there is a difference between difficulty and just waiting years for the right fish to show up in the travelling cart. For the rest of the season, the routine didn't really change. Foraging, trash runs, and the short mining trips whenever I could. And by the 20th, I had finally enough gold to buy the Joja membership and started preparing things straight away. Around the same time, I hit fishing level 2, which would make getting bait so much easier. After much thought, I decided to repair the bridge first. I thought that unlocking the quarry was going to be huge for us, because it would give me access to large amounts of stone, coal, and other ores without relying on traditional mining. And in all honesty, I didn't really want to repair the bus at the moment, since I only had cherry bombs going into the skull caverns. I didn't waste this opportunity, and I cleared out most of the quarry with bombs and walked away with a massive pile of resources. That progress pushed my mining level even higher, and not long after, I was closing on level 6 mining. By the time summer was ended, I had reached floor 60 in the mines, unlocked access to hardwood through the mahogany seeds in the secret woods, and upgraded the coop to prepare for ducks in the fall. I grabbed a rare seed from the travelling cart whilst I was at it, and watched the dance of the moonlight jellies. And with that, summer came to an end. Before fall started, I managed to hit level 5 farming, and had my first real choice to make. If I chose the Rancher perk, it would have boosted my animal products by 20% straight away. In the end, I decided to go with Tiller. It would delay the initial gold I could make, but eventually, once I unlocked the Artisan perk at level 10, I would earn 40% more, not 20%. Once fall began, I went back to using cherry bombs to carve out just enough land to plant a few new crops, including the rare seed that I'd be saving for the star drop in the secret woods. I pushed down to floor 90 in the mines, reached the gold levels, and pulled the obsidian edge from the chest. Not long after a visit from the witch, it left me a void egg, which I immediately decided to incubate. A void chicken wasn't just cool to look at, it was another reliable source of higher value products, and I would need access to void mayonnaise anyway to access the witch's swamp. Fall also introduced special orders, and this week's was prismatic jelly. I spent the entire day hunting slimes in the mines just to finish it, but the reward was worth it. Monster musk. With some gold in hand, I topped up on hay, bought a few ducks, and before long, I hit floor 100 in the mines and grabbed the star drop. Most importantly, I hit level 6 mining, which finally unlocked the crafting recipe for regular bombs, and this was probably the moment things would start to speed up. With proper bombs, I could clear land properly, collect wood from trees, and for the first time, the farm actually started to look usable. With regular bombs in hand, it made the rest of the mines quite easy. By the 5th of fall, I reached floor 120 and picked up the skull key. Good thing I didn't buy that bus Joja upgrade, because when I got to the skull caverns, I would have realised that I can't get in. More land meant more sprinklers, which meant even more crops. I planted some pumpkins and expanded it by 6 more sprinklers. By the time blackberry season had rolled around, it was more free foraging experience and some easy gold. And by the 9th of fall, I had 10 sprinklers down and nearly 50 cranberries growing. With wood no longer being an issue, I could take 300 spare pieces to repair the bridge on the beach, where I could unlock a few new items such as coral, sea urchins, and more importantly, seaweed. If I could get lucky enough and find 5 pieces of seaweed, I'd be able to build myself a fish pond. By the middle of fall, I'd expanded my crab pots, picked up my second star drop from the Stardew Valley fair, and after saving for a long time, I could finally afford the next Joja upgrade, the greenhouse. I did hesitate, however, as now I had the skull key from floor 120. Buying the bus would have unlocked the skull caverns, which meant iridium and starfruit. But in the end, I thought getting ancient fruit growing as early as possible felt more important than that. So the next morning, I blew open a path to the greenhouse and planted my first ancient seeds with some deluxe speed grow. These few plants don't look like much, but they were the foundation for everything that came after it. Meanwhile, the mayonnaise setup was still doing its job quite well, and on the 20th, I took the sweet gem berry into the secret woods and collected my 3rd star drop. After harvesting another batch of pumpkins, I reached level 7 farming. That was good and all, but it did introduce a new problem. I needed farming level 9 by the time the ancient fruits had finished growing, in order to turn them back into more ancient seeds. And with winter quickly approaching, my crop experience was about to disappear completely. After selling off more cranberries, I went back to Joja for the next upgrade. This time, I did repair the bus, which was a pretty big turning point in the challenge. Not just because it was the most expensive upgrade, but because it unlocked the desert, starfruit, iridium ore, and the skull caverns. Before the end of the season, the bookseller sold me an expensive fishing book that was enough experience to push me up to fishing level 4. That mattered quite more than it sounded. At level 4 fishing, you unlock the recycling machine. For the first time, all this trash I've been hoarding could be turned into something useful, such as wood, coal, and refined quartz. By this point, the challenge had stopped being about surviving. I had to use absolutely everything the game would give me, even the most unlikely things, like trash in the recycling machines. But with winter approaching, money was about to slow to a halt. Crops were gone, and I still needed 2 Joja upgrades. If I was going to keep the momentum going, I was going to need another way to make gold, something that didn't solely rely on crops. Even in the winter season, the farm could still slightly run. Chickens and ducks would keep producing, although they did burn through hay much faster than normal. But animals alone wasn't going to pay for what I needed. If I wanted to finish Joja and continue progressing in the game, I would need a completely different source of income. That meant the Skull Cavern. For the first time, I headed out to the desert. I traded in a spare prismatic shard for the Galaxy Sword, grabbed a few spicy eels from the desert trader, and went straight into the Skull Cavern. It was my first real dive, and I didn't have many bombs, but anything I collected could be recycled back into even more bombs, so even a bad run could still be quite good for us. I only made it down to floor 41, and I didn't leave with much iridium, but that wasn't really the point. Every run I did made the next one much easier. I'd eventually need 5 iridium bars to repair the boat to Ginger Island, and a lot of hardwood on top of that, but those were problems for later. I went back to Joja and bought the next upgrade, the minecars. They made getting around the valley much quicker, but more importantly, they put me one step away from finishing the community centre. And the next day, returned to the Joja Mart and paid for the final upgrade. And with that, community centre was officially complete.
Brother, what's that?
Up until this point, the challenge had been about finding ways around missing tools. With the community centre now finished, that part was pretty much over. From here on out, the goal was simple: reach Ginger Island, unlock Mr. Key's Walnut Room, and see how close we can actually get to perfection. Although, don't worry, the lack of tools was about to give me the most problematic scenario ever. The first step was getting to Ginger Island. To get there, I would need 5 iridium bars, 5 battery packs, and 200 pieces of hardwood. 2 of those were quite easily solved. The iridium was coming from the Skull Cavern, and the battery packs weren't really an issue with lightning rods. It was the hardwood that's the problem. Normally, you just use an axe on some hardwood stumps, but without tools, that entire route was gone. Annoyingly, I tested it out, bombs don't work on the hardwood stumps either, and levelling up my foraging skill high enough to unlock the lumberjack profession just wasn't realistic. I did manage to get myself a few pieces of hardwood from the barrels in the mines, and a few mystery boxes, but it wasn't even close to being what I needed. The only reliable method I could think of was mahogany trees. If I could get the seeds from slimes in the secret woods, and then blow up the trees, I could technically farm hardwood. It would be a slow process, but at least it was something. The winter itself was mostly preparation, multiple trips to the Skull Caverns for iridium ore, combat experience, and eventually unlocking the recipe for the mega bombs. Once I had mega bombs, I kind of went a little overboard. I could now clear the farm on a scale never seen before. Trees disappeared, space appeared, and for the first time it actually felt like I was playing endgame Stardew Valley, just without tools. I did invest in a house upgrade in order to store my machines safely indoors, as there have been a few occasions where I've accidentally blown them up. In the spare time, I also turned the quarry into a massive tree farm, mainly for oak resin later. Kegs were coming, and I was going to need a lot of them. By the halfway point of winter, I was fully established in the Skull Cavern, swimming in iridium bars, and finally hitting mining level 10. That would boost the value of metal bars by 50%, and suddenly the money problem just disappeared. This new pile of wealth allowed me to finish upgrading the coop, unlocking rabbits, and I also picked up the lucky charm after trading in a rabbit's foot I found from a serpent. Before the end of winter, I started laying the groundwork for the future. I commissioned a barn with the eventual goal of filling it with goats and then aging the cheese. I was still a long way off, but this was the first step in doing that. With some gold to spare, I picked up a Way of the Wind book to permanently boost my movement speed, and not long after, I harvested my first ancient fruit. Without a seed maker just yet, I held on to them. Aside from a meteor, more Skull Cavern runs, and slowly upgrading the barn, that was the most of winter. One important milestone I did manage to squeeze in was unlocking the sewers. After donating enough artifacts to the museum, I met with Krobus and picked up another star drop. I didn't forget to make my way through the mutant bug lair and pick up the Dark Talisman. That would give me access to the Witch's Swamp, and then the Wizard's Magic Ink, and eventually the ability to summon buildings onto the farm, which is when the real scale of perfection finally became clear to me. I had 4 obelisks and a golden clock to make, totaling 13 million gold. So yeah, the kegs were definitely happening. Before the end of the year, I also hit fishing level 5, and I took the Trapper perk to make crab pots cheaper, since crab pot fish just do not sell for anything. I also reached foraging level 7, unlocking tree fertilizer. That was going to matter quite a bit for hardwood, especially considering I only had 31 pieces at this point. And with that, the first year without any tools was over. Year 2 started with zero hesitation. I blew open a massive section of the farm and laid down as many sprinklers as I could. Iridium sprinklers would have been much better, but I just couldn't spare the battery packs. I needed them for the boat. This season, I planted one of every crop for gifts and cooking, but most of the space went to potatoes. I nearly ended up buying kale, but then I realised that I didn't have a scythe, I would have no way of harvesting them, so that would have been funny. I didn't stop there, however. I carved out a second area of the farm, dropped the rest of the sprinklers down, and filled it with even more crops. At this point, I also locked in the iridium bars and the battery packs at the boat, so I wouldn't accidentally waste them, which meant the last thing I needed was the 200 pieces of hardwood. By this point, the crab pots had completely taken over the river. I won't keep mentioning them, but every single day they were getting emptied, turned into sashimi, which I thought was a clever way to use the crab pot fish. Not long after, I finally gained access to the dwarf shop. Being able to buy bombs directly now meant I basically had an infinite supply of bombs. I also built myself a shed with the very goal of filling it with kegs. And then I managed to hit farming level 9. That meant I could make the seed maker, and the goal was simple: fill the greenhouse with them and turn any more into wine. Of course, getting there wasn't without its problems. While bombing more of the greenhouse, I accidentally wiped out most of my fully grown ancient fruit plants. With the remaining space, I decided to sell some iridium bars and bought as many starfruit seeds as possible. By the middle of the season, I was skipping days after doing my chores. That was until the desert festival came around, and my plan to get the rest of the hardwood was finally here. It turns out you can get hardwood here. If Leah is at her stall, she'll trade you 100 pieces of hardwood in exchange for some calico eggs. So, after 2 days of the festival, I managed to hit an egg rating of 55 both times, getting 2 magic rock candies, and then I went straight to trade with Leah. With these 100 extra pieces of hardwood, I finally had over 200 pieces of it. The next morning, I handed over the hardwood, and the boat was officially repaired. Before leaving, I harvested one last batch of starfruit to turn into starfruit wine, and then I went to Ginger Island. I still cannot believe this is actually possible without tools. But this is the part of the challenge where it stopped being about careful planning, and I started to ask myself whether it was even possible in the first place, as I was about to realise something terrible. Almost immediately upon arriving on Ginger Island, I knew this wasn't going to be straightforward. I knew that some golden walnuts were going to be impossible to get without tools, like this one in Leo's cabin. I could still collect most of the golden walnuts on the island north, however, and anything hidden underground could thankfully be uncovered with bombs. After spending the entire day on the island, I had enough to unlock the island west, and eventually the dig site. The next day, I came back loaded with ancient seeds and starfruit seeds and planted them on the island farm. That was when I entered the volcano. That's where my heart dropped. There's a lava river in the way. Normally, you would need a watering can in order to make a path across the river and enter the volcano. But without one, there was no way across. And I checked everything. There just wasn't a trick, there wasn't a workaround, and there wasn't a loophole this time. This was the first time in the entire challenge where I just couldn't see a way forward, and that's usually the point where I decide if a challenge is even worth finishing in the first place. From the start of this run, I relied on the tiniest of things just to keep moving forward, and finally, with perfection in sight, I'd hit something that just didn't have a solution. You might be thinking about the parrot that builds you a bridge across for 5 golden walnuts. The problem is, that parrot only appears after you've reached the forge, and without a way to cross the lava, reaching the forge is impossible. And that changes everything. We would now not be able to ship every item we needed for perfection, as we cannot gain access to the ostrich egg, cinder shards, magma caps, and probably even more items. We wouldn't be able to build all the obelisks on the farm, since we needed 10 dragon teeth for the island one. We couldn't complete the monster slayer hero, nor could we craft every recipe, such as the ostrich incubator, deluxe retaining soil, and the island warp totem. So that was the question. Was this it? After all of this, was perfection actually impossible without using tools? Of course it wasn't, and that is thanks to the 1.6 update. It turns out there is going to be a way around this. If you interact with the perfection tracker inside Mr. Key's walnut room, something strange happens. The next morning, a JoJo employee named Fizz will send you a letter inviting you to meet them in a cave on Ginger Island. Inside this cave, they will sell you something called perfection waivers. They can let you bypass perfection requirements entirely. The catch is the price. It costs 500,000 gold for 1%. But before we can even talk about that, we had to get 100 golden walnuts and get into Mr. Key's walnut room. Reaching 100 golden walnuts would normally require the volcano, which I still couldn't access. So the plan was, I would collect as many as I physically could do, and then pay the Joja parrot to find the rest of them. 10,000 gold per golden walnut. The Joja Mart was really everywhere in this run, but without it, this challenge would have ended back at the volcano. Between the pirate's locket quest and exploration, I had enough golden walnuts to repair the island farmhouse, and honestly, most of spring after that was quiet. I was waiting for ancient fruit and star fruit to grow, I was finishing monster slayer goals, diving into the skull caverns, and saving up my gold. The plan was simple. I would try and complete as much of perfection as possible on my own, because every single percent I could get myself would save me 500,000 gold later on. After digging into how perfection is calculated, I realised something important. Each requirement doesn't give its percentage all at once. It's split evenly across everything inside of it. Monster Slayer Hero, for example, is worth 10% in total, but since there are 12 goals, each one I completed gave me just under 1%. Or for any math nerds, 10 divided by 12 goals equals 0.83% of perfection each Monster Slayer goal I completed. And it's rounded down, so 2 Monster Slayer goals would be 1.66%, but would actually just mean 1. The same applies to shipping, cooking, friendships, everything. That meant if I couldn't fully complete a category, getting close still mattered quite a bit. But there were limits to this, of course. Catching every fish alone would cost me 10%, since I didn't have the fishing rod, which also meant the Master Angler star drop was impossible. And no, buying fish from the travelling cart does not count. Even in the best case scenario, I was going to be missing at least 20% perfection, and that still assumes I can make great friends with everybody, craft every item I still can, and so on, which was going to be tough on its own. And this is where we enter the most painful stage of the challenge. At this point, the challenge stopped changing, the strategy was locked in, and everything came down to 2 things. The first thing was completing tasks that contribute towards the perfection tracker, building the obelisks, eventually affording the golden clock, maxing out every skill I could, great friends, and much more. And the other thing, getting rich. By the end of spring, I had managed to reach fishing level 8, and the ancient fruit inside the greenhouse was growing faster than I could keep up with. And I also learned something so useful that I'm still annoyed right now that I didn't know it earlier. It turns out, you can just pick the sprinklers back up, and anything to that matter. If you just repeatedly click on something you've placed down, it will eventually just pop up. Since I couldn't get rid of the withered crops, I thought there was no way of reusing sprinklers. Figuring this out now wasn't really the best timing. It meant I wasted a ridiculous amount of resources for absolutely no reason. I'm sure all of you are shouting at the screen right now. From that point onwards, every season ended the same way. I would pull up the sprinklers, reset the farmland again, and scale even bigger than before. And to be honest, I'm not even going to pretend this part was interesting to watch. The rest of my days were spent building kegs, growing crops, expanding the ancient fruit on the farm and on Ginger Island now, and turning them all back into wine. By the middle of the summer, the basement was finished, which meant I had casks full of goat's cheese. I would need around 720,000 gold just to buy the remaining golden walnuts. After a few more harvests and the Gorman Frog quests, I finally had enough to rebuild the island resort, and paid for the parrot to find the rest of them. This meant I'd collected all 130 golden walnuts, and would gain a 5% boost on the perfection tracker. And for the first time I checked it out, and we were at 21%. Yeah, we need to get a move on. But in fairness, we already have most of the items to ship anyway. We have already made good progress in the friendships, and we aren't too far away. And we do need to start cooking. But as of right now, if I were to just focus on gold, we would need around 39.5 million gold. As if we bought the remaining 79% perfection for 500,000 gold per 1%. Yeah, no thanks. One by one, I built all of the obelisk. First the desert, then the beach, and then finally the mountain. And with those out of the way, there was only one thing left to get, the golden clock, which cost 10 million gold, which was going to take us a while. At this point, we had a fully grown island farm full of ancient fruit, an entire shed full of kegs, an entire area above the farm filled with kegs, and it just meant doing this over and over again. And by the end of my second year, we were up to 2.7 million gold. By fall 11th of year 3, I finally crossed the 10 million gold mark and built myself the golden clock. The farm was a pretty big mess by then, overgrown, chaotic, and it was barely recognisable. But to be honest, I didn't care anymore. In this time, I've been ticking off everything I could, shipping items, cooking recipes, and trying to get people to max friendship. By summer 13th of year 4, I decided to marry Hayley. It wasn't for the romance, but it was for the star drop she gives you. When I checked the perfection tracker after that, I was sitting at a comfortable 49%. It wasn't too bad, considering how many things were still impossible for me to get. From my estimates, I guessed I was going to need to buy maybe 45% of perfection waivers, which would still work out about 22 million gold. At that point, I wasn't even halfway there. By the start of my 5th year, I'd climbed up to 15 million gold and 57% perfection. It was close, but I still didn't have enough, so I kept going. By fall of year 6, everything was finally ready. The final ancient fruit harvest inside the greenhouse, the last batch of wine from my kegs, and one last ancient fruit collection on Ginger Island. After sleeping on the 8th of fall, I took every single piece of gold I had left and handed it over to Fizz. 42 perfection waivers, 21 million gold, and that was enough. Perfection was achieved, without tools. The next morning, Hayley and I walked up to the summit, and after everything this run had taken, standing there and watching that cutscene play out, yeah, it was worth it. Not because this run was particularly efficient or smart, but because it proved the game could be pushed further than I ever had expected. When I first started this run, I didn't even know if it was possible. Stardew Valley is a game built around tools, and taking them away didn't just make things harder, it broke the game in ways I just didn't expect. There were points where it felt clever to do things, there were points where it felt tedious, and there was points where it felt genuinely impossible. But that's kind of what I enjoy about challenges such as this. Not seeing how fast something can be done, but just seeing what's possible with such high limitations. Achieving perfection without tools wasn't clean, and it definitely wasn't easy. But it was possible. And if nothing else, it completely changed how I looked at Stardew Valley. And honestly, finishing this challenge didn't really feel like an ending to me. If anything, it made me even more curious on how many other ways this game can be pushed before it is truly impossible to beat it. If you enjoy challenges that push the game way past where they're supposed to go, that's pretty much what I do here, so subscribe to see more. But anyway, thanks for watching.